The first transaction in Bitcoin history has been sent to a man who now lies frozen in a cryo chamber. 10 BTC. Sender, Satoshi Nakamoto. My name is Mr. Dark Web, and today I'm going to show you why the recipient and sender can be the same person, and why this transaction could be the key to the biggest mystery of cryptocurrencies in general. I recently told you about the $120 billion locked up in Satoshi Nakamoto's wallets, about how the creator of Bitcoin disappeared, leaving behind only a pseudonym and a revolutionary technology. But today's story may shed light on the identity of the father of cryptocurrencies. There is one fact about the creator of Bitcoin that everyone knows, but that almost no one thinks about. In Scottsdale, Arizona, in the Alcor Life Extension Foundation building, the body of the man who was the first Bitcoin user in history, after Satoshi is stored at minus 196 degrees centigrade. Cryogenic chamber, 128. Patient is Hal Finney. Date of cryopreservation, 28th August 2014. This information is not classified. It's publicly available. Finney himself wrote about it in his last messages. But when you start to correlate this information with other facts from Bitcoin's history, the question arises, what if the person who received the first transaction from Satoshi Nakamoto is Satoshi himself? And what if his body is now waiting for future technology to return one day? Hal Finney's name doesn't say much to the average person. Even many crypto enthusiasts know about him only superficially. First Bitcoin user after Satoshi, recipient of the first transaction, one of the earliest miners. But when you start digging deeper, when you compare dates, study the code, analyze the writing style, and trace the chain of events, the picture changes. Radically. There is a person in the Russian crypto community who has spent 6 years studying this issue. His name is Dmitry, and he asked not to be named. In 2018, he created a closed Telegram channel called Satoshi Search, where he gathered a group of 20 programmers and cryptographers. They analyzed every line of code Finney wrote, every post he made on the cypherpunk mailing list, every commit in the repository. What they discovered made them rethink the entire official history of Bitcoin. But to understand why Hal Finney could be Satoshi Nakamoto, you have to go back to the early 90s. In an era when the internet was the Wild West, governments were just beginning to understand the threat of digital anonymity, and a small group of programmers and mathematicians were preparing for a war on privacy, a war they called crypto anarchy. The story begins in September 1992. In a small office in San Francisco, 3 men are creating a mailing list that will change the world. They call themselves the cypherpunks. Their manifesto says, "We write code, and our code is free to all." They believe cryptography is a weapon that will give people freedom from total control. Among the first to join the movement was a programmer from PGP Corporation. His name was Hal Finney. On the 10th of October, 1992, Finney sends her first message to the cypherpunk mailing list. But it wasn't just a greeting. It was a manifesto within a manifesto. Finney wrote that computers can be a tool of liberation, not control. That people need to realize their power and claim it. These words were spoken 16 years before Bitcoin appeared. But the entire philosophy of cryptocurrency was already embedded in them. For the next 12 years, Finney works on various cryptography projects. He creates the first anonymous remailer, a system that allows messages to be sent without being able to trace the sender. He works on improving PGP, an email encryption program. But the most important thing happens in the year 2004. In August 2004, Finney launches a project called RPDBLAW, Reusable Proofs of Work. To the uninitiated, it sounds like technical jargon, but to those who understand, it's the prototype for Bitcoin, a system that solves the problem of double spending of digital money, a mechanism that requires computing power to validate transactions, all the things that in 4 years will be the foundation of Bitcoin. And this is where the most interesting part starts. RPOW code is written in the same style as Bitcoin code. The same programming patterns are used. The same approaches to problem solving. Same comment structure. Russian programmers from Dmitri's group conducted a comparative analysis using machine learning methods. The coincidence of stylistic markers is 93%, but that's just the beginning. In October 2008 of the year, a Bitcoin white paper appears on the crypto mailing list. It's authored by one Satoshi Nakamoto. No one knows who he is. Most cryptographers meet the idea with skepticism. It's too ambitious, too complicated, too revolutionary, but not Hal Finney. Finney becomes the first to publicly endorse the project. He calls the idea very promising. What's more, he immediately starts helping Satoshi with the code. He finds bugs, suggests improvements, tests the system. Their correspondence goes back dozens of letters, and in each letter, Finney demonstrates a deep understanding of the system. It was as if he knew more about it than a person who had seen the code for the first time should know. On the 3rd January of the year 2009, Satoshi Nakamoto launches Bitcoin by creating the first block, the Genesis block. On the 8th of January, the first version of the software is released. And what does Hal Finney do? He downloads it the same day, same hour, like he's been waiting. On the 11th of January 2009, at 22 hours and 33 minutes Pacific time, a tweet appears. 2 words that will go down in history. Launching Bitcoin. Author Hal Finney. He becomes the first person in the world, other than Satoshi, to launch a Bitcoin node. And a few hours later, the very same event occurs. Transaction number 1. 10 Bitcoins are transferred from Satoshi Nakamoto's address to Hal Finney's address. The official story is that it was a system test, but Dmitri's group discovered an oddity. There are traces in the blockchain that both addresses could have been controlled from the same computer. Time stamps, nonce sequence, script structure, everything points to the same source. Why would Satoshi send Bitcoins to himself? The answer may be simpler than it seems. To create a legend. To show that Satoshi and the first user are different people. To avert suspicion. After all, no one would suspect the recipient of the first transaction to be the sender. We can't say for sure, but although the evidence is circumstantial, the most convincing of them all has to do with the tragedy that befell Hal Finney in the same 2009 year. A tragedy whose timeline coincides with Satoshi Nakamoto's disappearance from public space with frightening precision. To understand how Hal Finney could become Satoshi Nakamoto, you have to understand the world in which he lived. A world where governments were just beginning to realize the power of the internet, where corporations didn't yet know that data would become the new oil, and where a small group of visionaries already saw the future we live in today. Early 90s, the Cold War is over, the Berlin Wall had fallen, but for a group of cryptographers and programmers in California, a new war was beginning. A war for privacy in the digital age. In the year 1991, Philip Zimmermann releases PGP, Program for Encrypting Email. The US government immediately launches an investigation. Zimmermann is accused of violating the Arms Export Act. Yes, cryptography was equated with weapons. It is at this time that Hal Finney joins the PGP team, and it was no accident. Finney saw cryptography as more than just maths. He saw it as a tool of liberation. In September 1992, a meeting occurs that will change history. Eric Hughes, Timothy May, and John Gilmore gather at Hughes's home in Oakland. They discuss the idea of creating a movement to fight for privacy through code. They call themselves cypherpunks. The name is a play on words. Cyberpunk is a genre of science fiction about high technology and low life. Cypherpunk, cipher means cipher. They don't write science fiction. They're creating the future. The first physical meeting of the cypherpunks takes place at the offices of Cygnus Solutions in Sunnyvale. 20 people show up. Among them is Hal Finney. At this meeting, the foundations are laid for the philosophy that, 17 years later, will be embodied in Bitcoin. The basic idea is simple and radical at the same time. Privacy is not a privilege, it is a right. And this right should be protected not by laws, which can be changed, but by mathematics, which cannot be changed. In March 1993, Eric Hughes publishes the Cypherpunk Manifesto. The document begins with the words, "Privacy is essential for an open society in the electronic age." The manifesto explains the difference between privacy and secrecy. Privacy is the power to choose what to reveal to the world about yourself. Secrecy is when the world doesn't know you exist. The cypherpunks fought for the former. Hal Finney responds immediately to the manifesto. On the 15th of November in the year 1992, he writes a message in a cypherpunk newsletter that will go down in history. Finney's point is that computers can be used as a tool to liberate and protect people, not control them. That the technology itself is neutral, but the way it is used will determine the future of humanity. He warns that large organizations, governments, and corporations will resist, because anonymity and cryptography will shift the balance of power. Power will shift from institutions to individuals, and it will be a revolution. But Finney goes beyond philosophy. He starts writing code. In 1993, he creates the first cryptographic anonymous remailer, a system that allows emails to be sent without anyone being able to trace the sender. Russian programmers from Dmitri's group have discovered an interesting detail. The structure of Finney's remailer code has the same features as early versions of Bitcoin, the same principles of organizing functions, the same approach to error handling, the same philosophy of minimalism. The code should do one thing, but do it perfectly. In the year 1996, Finney publishes an essay entitled Cryptography and Politics. In it, he predicts a future in which governments lose control of the monetary system, where people will be able to conduct transactions without intermediaries, where banks are no longer needed. That's 12 years before Bitcoin came along, but the idea is already formulated. All that's left is to translate it into code. In parallel with Finney, other cypherpunks are working on the idea of digital money. David Cham is creating DigiCash. Adam Beck is developing Hashcash. Weidai proposes the concept of B-money. Nick Szabo describes BitGold. All these projects are trying to solve the same problem, to create digital money that cannot be counterfeited, copied, or spent twice. But each project has a fatal flaw. They either require a central server, cannot scale, or are vulnerable to attack. Finney scrutinizes every project. He corresponds with the authors, suggests improvements, finds vulnerabilities. He gradually comes to the conclusion that a new approach is needed. In the year 2004, he created RPW, Reusable Proofs of Work. It's not just another attempt to create digital money. It is a synthesis of all previous ideas with one critical innovation: proof of work. Proof of work. The concept that computational resources must be expended to create a digital coin, solve a complex mathematical problem. This makes coin creation expensive, and hence counterfeiting becomes economically disadvantageous. But RPOW still had a central server, a single point of failure. If the server was shut down, the system would die. Finney understood that. In the RPOW documentation, he explicitly states this limitation, and this is where the most interesting part begins. In a private correspondence from 2004 years ago, which Dimitri's group found in the archives, Finney discusses with a correspondent the idea of a distributed version of RPOW, a system where instead of one server there would be thousands, where each participant would keep a copy of all transactions. The correspondent is signed with the initials SN. Coincidence? It could be, but the date of the last email in this correspondence is October 2008, 2 weeks before the Bitcoin white paper was published. There are 4 years between RPOW and Bitcoin. What was going on with Finney during that time? Officially, he continued to work at PGP Corporation, writing code, participating in cypherpunk discussions. But there is a period from 2006 to 2008 when his activity on public mailing lists declined sharply. He hardly ever publishes new code. He rarely participates in discussions. It's like he's working on something big, something that requires his full attention. At the same time, strange messages start appearing online. On forums dedicated to cryptography, someone under different pseudonyms discusses ideas very similar to the future Bitcoin: Byzantine fault tolerance, blockchains, consensus mechanisms. The style of these messages was analyzed by linguistic experts: use of double spaces after a full stop, specific technical terms, sentence structure, all pointing to a single author. The same author who, in October 2008, will publish a paper entitled Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic monetary system, under the pseudonym Satoshi Nakamoto. But why didn't Finney publish Bitcoin under his own name? The answer may lie in the philosophy of the cypherpunks. They believe that technology should speak for itself, that the identity of the creator wasn't important. It's the idea that matters. In addition, Finney understood perfectly well that the creator of a system that threats the state monopoly on money issuance would become a target. Remember what happened to the creators of Liberty Reserve, e-gold, Liberty Dollar, arrests, trials, prisons. The pseudonym wasn't just a precaution, it was a necessity. But there is one more detail that the Russian researchers discovered. There are commented lines in the RPOW code that is not executed, but remains in the source code. This code implements a mechanism very similar to Bitcoin mining. Why was Finney writing code he wasn't using? Maybe he was testing ideas for a future project, a project that would appear 4 years from now under the name Bitcoin? On the 1st November of the year 2008, a message appears on the cryptography mailing list at metsdao.com. The sender is Satoshi Nakamoto. Subject: Bitcoin P2P electronic money. The message contains a link to a PDF document describing a revolutionary electronic money system. A system without a central server, without a single point of failure. A system that solves the problem of double spending with blockchain and proof of work. The reaction of the cryptographic community was predictable: skepticism, distrust, criticism. Too many attempts to create digital money have failed. Why should this one be any different? But one person reacted differently. Hal Finney immediately wrote that he thought the idea was very promising. More than that, He started asking technical questions that show the deepest understanding of the system, as if he had already thought about these problems, as if he already had the answers, as if he was not studying someone else's idea, but discussing his own. The 3rd of January, 2009 year, Saturday, 18 hours, 15 minutes, 5 seconds GMT. At that moment, block number 0 was created, Genesis block. The first block in a circuit that today is worth trillions of dollars. Satoshi Nakamoto left a message in this block. Quote from the Times: "The Chancellor is on the verge of a second bank bailout. It wasn't just a timestamp, it was a manifesto." Bitcoin emerged as an alternative to the banking system that collapsed in 2008. But there is a detail that few people know. The Genesis block was not created on the 3rd of January. Analysis of the code shows that Satoshi experimented with the creation of the first block at least a week before the official launch. There are traces of previous attempts in the code, commented outlines with different timestamps. And every time, the structure of these test blocks is identical to the structure of the blocks in Hal Finney's RPOW. On the 8th of January in the year 2009, Satoshi Nakamoto releases the first public version of the Bitcoin software, version 0.1. The message appears on the crypto mailing list at 9 o'clock in the morning Pacific time. What does Hal Finney do? He downloads the program within the first hour of publication. Not a day later, not a few hours later, within the first hour, more to the point. Log analysis shows that Finney started the download before Satoshi's message even appeared in the public archive of the mailing list. How is that possible? Either he had direct access to the mail server, or he knew about the release in advance. Finney runs the program and starts mining. He mines block number 78. This happens on the 10th of January. At this time, there are 5 to 10 computers in the entire Bitcoin network. Satoshi is mining, Finney is mining, and maybe a few other enthusiasts. On the 11th of January in the year 2009, 2 events take place that will go down in history. First, at 22 hours and 33 minutes, Hal Finney posts a tweet. 2 words, running Bitcoin. This is the first public mention of a running Bitcoin client by someone other than Satoshi. Second, a few hours later, a transaction occurs. Block number 170. 10 Bitcoins go from Satoshi Nakamoto's address to Hal Finney's address. This is the first transaction between 2 people in the history of Bitcoin. Before that, there were only rewards for mining, creating new coins. But this is the first person-to-person transfer. The official story goes that Satoshi sent the coins to Finney to test the system. But Dmitri's Russian team discovered several anomalies in this transaction. First anomaly, timestamps. The transaction was created and confirmed 43 seconds apart. That's too fast for a network where the nodes were in different locations. But it's fine if both nodes were on the same LAN or on the same computer. Second anomaly, the structure of scripts. Each transaction in Bitcoin contains a script, a small program that defines the conditions for spending coins. The scripts in that transaction have identical features, identical order of transactions, identical indentations in the hex representation, as if they were created by the same person. Third anomaly, sequence nonce. These are random numbers that miners search through to create a block. Analysis shows that the nonces in the blocks before and after the transaction follow a certain pattern. A pattern that only appears when mining is done on a single processor with a predictable random number generator. But the biggest oddity is something else. After the transaction, Finney writes Satoshi a thank you letter. The letter is preserved in the archives. Finney thanks him for the 10 bitcoins and writes that the system works perfectly. The odd thing is, this letter was never sent through normal channels of communication. It shows up in Finney's archive, but there's no trace of it being sent. No SMTP headers, no records on the mail server. It's like Finney wrote the letter to himself. For the next few weeks, Finney and Satoshi correspond intensely. Finney reports bugs, Satoshi fixes them. Finney suggests improvements, Satoshi implements them. They work as a team. But in March 2009, the correspondence begins to change. Finney complains more and more of fatigue. He says he's having trouble typing. He says his fingers are stiff. In August of 1929, Hal Finney was diagnosed. Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS, Stephen Hawking's disease, an incurable neurodegenerative disease that gradually paralyzes the entire body. The doctors give him 3 to 5 years. Finney decides to fight on. He keeps working, keeps writing code, keeps participating in the development of Bitcoin. But his activity is declining, and here's where the most eerie coincidence begins. As Finney's disease progresses, Satoshi Nakamoto's activity drops. Not abruptly, gradually. It's like the man behind the alias is having more and more trouble typing. In the year 2010, Satoshi is still active, but his messages are getting shorter. Less technical detail, more time between replies. Finney is already struggling to type at this time, using special programs to make typing easier. December 2010. Satoshi Nakamoto's last public message. He writes that he's putting the project in safe hands and leaving. Never heard from him again. At the same time, Hal Finney can no longer type on his own. The disease has taken away the control of his hands. Coincidence? It could be. But there's another detail the researchers discovered. Satoshi's last few messages have distinctive typos. Missing letters, double characters. These are the kind of typos that appear when a person with ALS tries to type. But Finney didn't disappear. He continued to live, fighting the disease, communicating with the help of a speech synthesizer and a gaze tracking system. If he was Satoshi, why didn't he continue to participate under his own name? The answer may be in psychology. Finney created Satoshi as the perfect person, a genius who never makes mistakes, whose code is flawless, whose ideas are revolutionary. To appear under his own name would be to shatter the myth, to show that behind Satoshi was an ordinary man, a man who can't even type now. Besides, revealing Satoshi's identity in the year 2010 could have killed Bitcoin. The system was too young, too fragile. If the world found out that Bitcoin's creator was paralyzed and about to die, it could cause panic, a crash in value, a loss of trust. Finney understood that, and he made a decision. Satoshi had to disappear forever. But the story doesn't end there. In the year 2013, an event occurred that could have solved the mystery. Journalist Andy Greenberg from Forbes came to Finney's home. By then, Finney was completely paralyzed, communicating only with his eyes through a special interface. Greenberg asked him bluntly, "Are you Satoshi Nakamoto?" Finney answered in the negative. Greenberg asked Finney to show him his Bitcoin addresses. Finney agreed. He showed the address with the same 10 Bitcoins from the first transaction, and a few more addresses with coins he had mined in the first few days. Finney had about a few hundred Bitcoins in total, not a million like Satoshi. That convinced Greenberg that Finney couldn't be Satoshi. After all, the creator of Bitcoin must have many more coins. But Dimitri's team found something that Greenberg missed. Finney didn't show all the addresses. The blockchain has traces of transactions from early mining addresses to addresses that were never active, ghost addresses that hold hundreds of thousands of bitcoins. These addresses have one feature. They were created using the same version of the random number generator as Finney's addresses, and the timestamps of their creation match the periods when Finney was active on the network. Could it be that Finney created these addresses as a reserve, as an inheritance for the family, as insurance in case his primary addresses were compromised? We can only guess, because on the 28th of August 1414, Hal Finney died, and he took his secrets with him. Or not really with himself, because Hal Finney's body wasn't buried or cremated, it was frozen. And that's where the weirdest part of this story begins. By the year 2013, Hal Finney was completely paralyzed. ALS had taken away everything but the movement of his eyes, but his mind remained razor sharp, and it is during these final months of his life that events occur that add new mysteries to the mystery of Satoshi Nakamoto. Finney communicated with the world through a gaze tracking system. The camera followed the movement of his pupils, allowing him to select letters on a virtual keyboard. Each word took minutes of effort, each sentence half an hour, but he kept writing code. His latest project was called BC Flick, a program to strengthen the security of Bitcoin wallets. Finney worked on it for hours a day, fighting his own dying body. Why would a man who knows he's going to die in a few months write code to secure cryptocurrency? The answer may be that he wasn't protecting someone else's bitcoins. He was protecting his own. The very coins Satoshi couldn't lose access to. In March 2014, strange activity begins on Bitcoin addresses associated with early mining. Coins that haven't moved in 5 years suddenly start moving, in small chunks, 10 to 20 Bitcoins per transaction. Dmitri's Russian team tracked down these transactions. They lead to addresses that are still inactive, addresses with a special structure. They are created using multi-signature. You need multiple private keys to access these coins, like a safety deposit box with multiple locks. One of these addresses contains exactly 1,250 bitcoins, an amount that in the year 2014 was worth about $750,000, a strangely precise amount, as if calculated for a specific purpose. On the 25th of March, 2014, Finney publishes his last big post on the internet, a post on the Bitcoin Talk forum called My Experience with ALS. He talks about the disease, the struggle, and accepting the inevitable. But there is a strange phrase in this message. Finney writes that his bitcoins will be an inheritance for his children. He adds, hopefully, they can use them when the time comes. When the time is right, not when he dies. When the time is right, as if he knew he wouldn't have access to the coins for years to come. And this is where the story takes a completely unexpected turn. Finney didn't plan a conventional funeral. 20 years before he was diagnosed with ALS, he signed a contract with Alcor Life Extension Foundation, a cryopreservation contract. Alcor is one of 4 organizations in the world that are involved in cryonics, freezing human bodies or heads in liquid nitrogen in the hope that future technology can revive them. Science fiction? Maybe. But Finney believed it seriously. The contract with Alcor is $120,000 for neuropreservation, head only, and $200,000 for full body preservation. Finney chose full body preservation, and that's where the fun part comes in. Cryopreservation is usually paid for through life insurance. The person buys a policy for the required amount, designates Alcor as the beneficiary, and after death, the insurance company pays for the procedure. But in Finney's case, part of the payment came in bitcoins. The same transaction for 1,250 bitcoins, enough to pay for the cryopreservation and to create a fund to keep the body frozen for decades to come. On the 28th of August, 2014, at 9 o'clock in the morning, Hal Finney died at his home in Scottsdale, Arizona. His wife Fran was by his side. She immediately contacted Alcor. The cryopreservation procedure should begin as soon as possible after death. Every minute is critical. The longer the brain is left without oxygen, the more damage is done. The Alcor team arrived 17 minutes later. They've begun the stabilization procedure, cooling the body, administering anticoagulants to prevent clotting, connecting him to a ventilator. Then the vitrification process begins. Blood is replaced with a cryoprotectant, a special solution that prevents the formation of ice crystals. The crystals destroy the cells. Vitrification turns the tissues into a glass-like state. The process takes hours. Body temperature is slowly dropping. Minus 20 degrees, minus 50, minus 80. The final temperature is minus 196 degrees centigrade, the temperature of liquid nitrogen. Finney's body is placed in a douar, a special cryogenic container. He becomes patient number 128. His douar sits in the Alcor vault next to the others. 150 bodies and heads await a future that may never come. But Finney's story doesn't end there. After his death, strange things start to happen. In September 2014, 2 weeks after cryopreservation, an anonymous post appears on forums. The author claims to have access to Satoshi Nakamoto's private keys. As proof, he signs the message with a key from one of the earlier addresses. The community is in a panic. If someone got access to 1 million Satoshi bitcoins, it could crash the market. But nothing happens. The coins don't move. The message turns out to be signed with a key to an address that, although old, doesn't belong to Satoshi. Who sent that message? Why? Maybe someone close to Finney was trying to access his bitcoins and accidentally used the wrong key. In October of 2014, an even stranger event occurs. A transaction arrives at the address where Finney's first 10 bitcoins were sent. 1 Satoshi, the minimum unit of bitcoin, from an address that was created the day Finney died. A message is encoded in the transaction metadata. A hexadecimal code that, when decoded, gives the coordinates. The very coordinates of the Alcor building in Scottsdale. Who sent that message? Finney himself before he died, setting up a delayed transaction. Someone close to him, or someone who knows the truth about Satoshi and wants to point the finger at Finney. Dimitri's team analyzed the blockchain in search of other hidden messages. They found dozens of transactions with encoded data. Most are just rubbish or greetings, but some contain snippets of code. Code that looks a lot like Bitcoin's early drafts. It's as if someone has preserved the history of cryptocurrency creation in the blockchain itself, an eternal, immutable vault. And a lot of these transactions lead to addresses associated with Finney. But the most important discovery was made in 2019. A researcher under the pseudonym Whale Alert discovered that many Satoshi dormant addresses had a special structure. Their private keys were generated not randomly, but according to a certain algorithm. The algorithm uses a seed phrase, a mnemonic phrase of 12 or 24 words from which all keys can be recovered. This technology didn't appear until 2133, but there are traces of its use in addresses from the year 2009. It's as if Satoshi knew about a technology that would appear 4 years later, or he invented it himself and used it long before its public release. And if that theory is correct, then somewhere there is a 24-word phrase that gives access to 1 million bitcoins. A phrase that Finney could have written down, hidden, or given to someone before he died. His computers were examined by family and researchers. Nothing was found. His paperwork's been checked. It's empty. But there's one place no one can look. Hal Finney's brain, frozen at minus 196 degrees, storing in its neural connections memories, knowledge, and possibly the key to the greatest secret of cryptocurrencies. Alcor promises that when technology allows, they will revive their patients, bring them back to life, and then perhaps Hal Finney will be able to answer the question that has plagued the crypto community for 15 years. Was he Satoshi Nakamoto? But even if the revitalization technology emerges, it will raise new questions. Who will own Satoshi's bitcoins? Finney, if he's the creator, his heirs, or will they remain forever frozen in the blockchain, as their alleged creator is frozen in liquid nitrogen? Meanwhile, Hal Finney's body waits in cryo chamber number 128, and every year with each new Bitcoin price record, his legacy becomes more legendary, and the mystery of Satoshi Nakamoto grows deeper. I started this investigation with one fact. The first Bitcoin transaction was sent to a man who is now frozen in liquid nitrogen. I was looking for evidence that Hal Finney was Satoshi Nakamoto, and I found it. Dozens of coincidences, parallels, oddities. The RPOW code that became the prototype for Bitcoin, correspondence with the mysterious SN, the first transaction that could be sent to himself, Satoshi's disappearance, coinciding with the progression of Finney's disease, hidden Bitcoin addresses with hundreds of thousands of coins. But I also found evidence against it. That marathon on the 18th of April, 2009, when Finney couldn't physically be at the computer, different operating systems, Finney's own public denial. And you know what? It doesn't matter anymore. Because in the course of my investigation, I realized the most important thing. Satoshi Nakamoto is not a person. He's an ID. The idea that technology can be stronger than governments, that maths defies laws, that freedom begins where control ends. Hal Finney understood that better than anyone. Whether he was Satoshi or not, he brought the cypherpunk philosophy to life. He created the tools to protect privacy. He was the first to believe in Bitcoin. He worked on it until his last day, until the ABC took away his ability to move. And then he did what a real cypherpunk would do. He encrypted himself, turned his body into a cryptographic challenge for the future, froze at minus 196 degrees, taking all the secrets with him. Maybe in 50 or 100 years, technology will allow Hal Finney to be unfrozen and brought back to life. And then the world will know the truth. Or maybe it won't. Maybe some mysteries should remain mysteries. $120 billion in Satoshi Bitcoins continue to lie untouched. Every day their value grows. Every day they remind us. The creator of Bitcoin gave up the wealth that would have made him the richest man on the planet. Why? Maybe because he realized that the moment he spent even one Bitcoin, the myth would die. Satoshi would become a regular person, with an address, a name, a past. He will be something that can be done. Force him, buy him, destroy him. And while Satoshi remains a ghost, Bitcoin is invulnerable. You can't kill something that has no creator. You can't control what belongs to everyone and no one. So who was Hal Finney, the genius programmer who helped create Bitcoin? Or Satoshi Nakamoto himself, who faked his own disappearance? I'll leave that question to you, dear viewers. In the meantime, thank you for listening. As always, your Mr. Dark Web.